Good.
We're starting.
Okay. Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order for Tuesday, 22 February 2022 at 07:30. Confirming member access as a preliminary matter. This is Robert Holland, the senior to the Shrewsbury Electric and Cable Operations Commission Chair. Please permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Tony Trippi.
Yeah, I'm here.
Maria Lemieux.
Here.
Mike Ruffolo.
I'm here.
Matt Beaton. I think he'll be joining us just a little bit later, and then Bob Holland. So we've got a quorum. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Christopher Roy, Selco General Manager.
Here.
Kathy Ryba, Administrative Assistant.
Here.
Ralph Iacarino, Director of Engineering and Electrical Operations.
Here.
Jackie Pratt, Director of Integrated Resources and Communications. Nothing heard. Greg Honorato, Director of Information Technology. Nothing heard. Jonathan Malavar, Senior Engineer.
Here.
Patrick Collins, Integrated Resources Analyst. Nothing heard. Tracy Schultz, Human Resources Coordinator.
Here.
Jim Zacco, Director of Finance and Administration.
Here.
Scott Stark, the Line Supervisor.
Here.
Megadi Sarapali, Field Engineer. Nope. Aaron Lacure, Broadband Technical System and Support Manager. Nope. Billy Yovan, Head End Supervisor.
Here.
Okay. And Rick Maxian, Marketing Coordinator. Nope, haven't heard there. Okay. Continuing on, introduction to the remote meeting. Good morning. This open meeting of the Selco Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with Senate Bill 2475, signed into law by Governor Baker on June 16th, 2021. Suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30 Alpha, Paragraph 18. This meeting of the Selco Commission will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Let me preface these prepared comments by stating that this should be our last Zoom meeting. The town has opened up the town hall and we will be having open meetings and present at the town hall in the future. But because this meeting had already been posted as a remote meeting, we continued on that schedule. So follow-on meetings will be open and held at the town hall. The order that allows this order that I'm referring to allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. For this meeting, the Selco Commission is convening by Google Meet, as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please be sure to press *6 to mute your device. This meeting will not feature public comment. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call. Okay. With that, we'll start down on our agenda. The first one was call to order, which we've done. The second is review and consider approval, bill schedules and warrants. Folks who've been provided the copy of the warrants and bills. Do we have any comments or corrections or questions about the warrants as presented? Tony, Mr. Trippi, do you have any comments or questions? I didn't hear it. Tony, you good on the warrants? Okay. Maria?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay, and Mike Ruffolo?
No comments.
Okay. Okay, and Tony, you had no comments, right? I think Tony's muted, so. Okay, let's do a roll call to approve.
Couldn't
Okay.
get back to the screen.
Okay.
No comment.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the, we'll take a roll call vote to approve the warrants as presented, and I will sign in abstention for the other folks, the master copy at the town hall. All in favor, Mr. Trippi?
Yes.
Maria Lemieux?
Yes.
Yeah, Mike Ruffolo?
Yes, except that's a miracle comment.
Yes, noted. And I don't think, has Matt joined us yet? No, and Bob Holland is yes. So the warrants approved, and I'll get those signed and into the town hall. The next on the agenda is review and consider approval of the meeting minutes of January 25th, 2022. I was not present at that meeting, so I don't have a dog in this hunt, but anybody have any comments about the minutes or corrections? Again, Tony?
No comment.
Okay, Maria?
No comment.
Mike?
No comments.
Okay, the three of you, do a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Okay, second?
Second.
Okay, a roll call vote to approve the minutes for the 25th of January, 2022. Mr. Trippy,
Yes.
Maria Lemieux,
Yes.
and Mike Ruffolo.
Yes.
Okay, and I'll abstain because I was not at that meeting. The minutes are approved. Next agenda item is the electric customer charge rate adjustment. With that, I will turn that over to Chris Roy.
All right, thank you very much. If I may just highlight some of the key points from the memo and tie it back with our prior meeting relating to the budget. So if you may recall, the budget forecast was around $800,000 to the negative. Again, that was incorporating a number of conservative projections with respect to operating expenses, as well as the forecast for the power supply expenses that we leverage MWIC for. And so dovetailing that, we went back and we've started to, over the last several months, I'll say, started looking at our rates. And so as part of that review, we did find that the last review that was done was in 2019 by PLM. And so with that, we just wanted to take a look and see what was in that what was in that analysis. And so one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind with respect to rate planning is there are two major components with the business and how revenues are collected, which is the power supply component, which is revenue neutral. It's a pass-through, and if you recall, we talked about the GTA, and the GTA is a mechanism to true up actual power supply costs with revenue collected. And so therefore, over collections aren't necessarily used for other aspects of the business. It's actually returned back to the customer in the form of the credit, where we're at today. The other component are the distribution charges, which is associated with the the normal costs of both materials and labor that go with conducting our business on a regular basis. And so one of the things that I try and look at with respect to rate design is we have the GTA, which ebbs and flows power supply markets, but the distribution side is much more predictable, similar to groceries and things like that, where just, people in the world, people get raises, costs of goods go up, and it's a much more level trajectory than the volatility of power supply. And so one of the things that I think is good practice is to review that and then have a ongoing strategy to have smaller incremental rate increases more frequently rather than big fluctuating rate increases every few years. And so as we move to that type of model, this is the first dive into looking at, well, what did 2019 show for us? And so a couple of the recommendations in this memo are stemming from the analysis in 2019 as we try and update the figures for today. And so what you'll see in the 2019 study that largely that focused on the GTA analysis. And so the distribution study, we went back and looked and found that the same firm had done an analysis back in 2012 with the 2013 implementation. So the last true rate increase for our distribution charges was about almost a decade ago. And with the exception of the customer charge that went from $2.90 to $5 back in 2019. And so in that analysis, we did find there were a couple other components that warranted a closer look and perhaps implementation as recommended here by this memo, which would be increasing that customer charge now from $5 to the $11.55, and as well as the general service and municipal charges starting on that progression from where they are now at $50, rather going to a full $180. We could split the difference, and that way we can see where we end up, as well as municipal. That's currently $2.90. They didn't see an adjustment back in 2019. That one again was recommended for 24, and so we'll split the difference at 12. Again, to try and get on track with more incremental changes that are closer together, and so that way we're avoiding that larger price spike, if you will, all at once. And so I guess the key questions then is, for any rate increase, would be how are folks impacted by this? So there's that analysis to identify the business need, and then there's the analysis about how folks would be impacted by the change to see if we can, make sure we're operating in, with respect to how consumers would be impacted by these changes. And so that's where we did the analysis based on 3 different usage classes, if you will. It's the very low users, average, I'd say, typical, if you will, at 750. And then your higher users, as we push to electrification, I think this is another category to keep an eye on, because, again, conservation plays a key role, but also as we push people to charge their cars at home, switch their heating systems to electric, you're going to see, these energy sources shift from non-Selco bills that people are still paying to a gas company or a gasoline, Shell or Exxon, but now they're coming to Selco. So we're trying to be mindful of these customer classes with respect to larger consumption. And so what we found is what you might expect with the customer charge. And actually, I should take a step back here with the customer charge recommendation. That is the fixed component of everyone's bill. And I mention that because it's an important piece to note, where there is a general analysis done and a general shift towards trying to recover the appropriate fixed components of our business in a fixed revenue generating mechanism of the bill. And so that's a lot different, or I would say a lot different, but that's different than previously, where dating back to, I have to make up a date, but dating back to, I don't know, the 50s, when there was our last push for major electrification, not in the way we're doing it today, but just use more electric, and you'll see the case studies where municipal utilities had storefronts downtown, whereas, hey, we sell electricity, why don't you buy electric appliances? Well, those went by the wayside, but it was a lot easier to base your business on variable revenue sources, because there's, fairly reliable electric growth that allowed that to be a more certain revenue generating mechanism. Well, we've kind of plateaued. We have this next launch in electrification, but again, I call it the cell phone plan. There's an inherent, I think, logic in that we have fixed costs. We have a fixed cost revenue mechanism, and so there's how we leverage that and what costs go into that bucket is part of the art as well as the science. But the electric customer charge is that fixed component, similar to the cell phone plan, which you pay a certain amount of money just to have the cell phone, and then you pay data on top of that. This is very similar, where you pay a certain amount just to have that meter connected, and then how much power supply you use is like your cell phone minutes. That can vary based on your consumption habits. And so here, I guess jumping back to the analysis, you'll see with the low users, which see the biggest jump, given it's the fixed charge, there's a couple of points to consider with respect to low consumers. There's three things that go into that. Yes, there could be someone who's very good or very efficient, but very good at turning off their lights and not using a lot. But what I have found is that there's very much in the minority there. A lot of times these low consumer levels, low consumption levels, are due to outbuildings, garages. A lot of folks that have second homes that then go somewhere else, and their primary residence has low consumption, and so that's one thing to factor in. And the key question is, are low users low income folks? Because those are the ones we want to make sure we're sensitive to and support. And there are several studies, I didn't cite them in here, but if we threw it in Google, that suggest because the low income folks don't have access to the funds to do energy efficiency measures, they're actually higher users. And so that's where other programs to target the folks, we don't need to target people with second homes. If you have a low a low use meter that's on a garage, that those aren't the folks we're trying to target with some of these programs. It's implementing a supplementary program that has an application process to access the individuals that we'd like to support. So that's that low consumer one. Usage, the average usage that we've calculated here for Shrewsbury is that 750 kilowatt hour class, and that's a 7% increase to an average user. And obviously there's a range. If you're lower than that, it'd be slightly higher, and higher than that, as you can see, it goes down. And so one of the things to keep in mind there is the rule of thumb, and this isn't on an ongoing basis, but the rule of thumb that I have been trained to adhere to is anything under 9% is typically the cap. And so going over 9%, that's when folks really start to get upset, and it starts to impact their monthly financials. And so this one, that 7% is in that category. Obviously, the low users are higher than that, but that's the percentage basis. And then 4% for the higher consumers in that category. The other point I just wanted to make really quickly, or 2 points, if we included the chart. And so if you had multiple charts for multiple years, you'd see some of these folks shift, but our rate comparison with respect to the other utilities in Massachusetts, we still compare extremely favorably, in my opinion. This change with respect to the average residential user moves Shrewsbury up one notch above Templeton. But that's not to say I'm not privy to this, but that's not to say they implement their own type of rate increase tomorrow and our ranking shifts right back to where it was. But each of these utilities has their own rate making strategy, and they ebb and flow. So I think this is just an indication that we're still very, very competitive, and it's just I think part of the ongoing rate making adjustments that everyone has to make. And then the last component, the 2019 study also suggested a change to the variable distribution component, or excuse me, residential rate, which is currently basically 11 cents to 13 cents, so another 2-cent increase. We're not recommending we make this adjustment at this time. Again, that would just compound to the percentage rate change, but also this is an opportunity. We're currently engaged in a rate making analysis with MWIC, and so we'll be able to look at this more closely with the current numbers, and then target, based on the outcome, target a future strategy for implementing a rate increase. So the idea here is to, in some ways, leverage the 2019 study on the customer charge. That'll help make up the budget differential that was presented last month. And then we can look at the forward-looking rate increase strategy once we have the MWIC numbers. And I think I'll pause there.
Okay, well, thank you. Go through the board and see if anybody has any questions or comments. Start with Tony Trippi.
No, I do not.
Okay. Maria Lemieux.
No.
No. Okay. And Mike Ruffolo.
I also have no comments.
Okay. And the only thing that I see from what you're presenting, Chris, is that people got to realize this is a multi-year change and adjustment. In other words, it wasn't like from one year to the next that the rate is changing. This goes back to 2019 or something you were talking about. It's something that we needed to do, was talked about last month in detail as far as how the budget went. It doesn't. It's only a fixed charge. It's not going to change in how much electricity you use. And those variables we'll get into later. So that's good. Okay. So I guess the recommendation that you made, and I'll read it so that everybody understands what we're actually voting on then. It's recommended the commission vote to adjust electric customer charge rates as follows, effective 1 April 2022. For residential, an increase from $5 per month to $11.55. For GS2, an increase from $50 to $120, and for municipal, increase from $2.90 to $12. With that, do I have a motion to move this motion?
I move that we accept this motion as written.
Okay, and do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, roll call vote to approve the recommendations for the customer charge rates as previously presented. All in favor, say aye. Tony Trippi.
Aye.
Okay, Maria Lemieux.
Aye.
Mike Ruffolo.
Aye.
And Bob Holland. Aye. Okay. Well, that completes agenda item number 4, and we'll move on to number 5, which is review and consider approval of protective lighting rate adjustment. Mr. Roy, can you explain a little bit what protective lighting is and what we need to be doing there, please?
Yes, sir. So I neglected to mention, our integrated resources team did a nice job putting together these memos. And so I think, as you might see at the top here, I'll tee this up. And if Patrick wants to speak to this, he's more than willing. I don't want to steal his thunder and everything. But if not, that's fine too. I'm used to rambling on too long, as folks have told me. I get it. So the protective lighting, again, not a huge component of our day-to-day operations, but that doesn't make it any less important. So right now, folks can request floodlights. As you can see, there's a few different categories here: street lights, floodlights, and to leverage lighting in many cases at their business for security lighting or whatever other use they might have to light up the exterior of their property. And so similar to doing the general rate analysis, we also took a look at this one to see how our rates were covering costs and future outlook for protective lighting technology. And so I wasn't sure. I thought I saw Patrick on here, but it's not on my screen. But,
I'm here. I can
Okay,
get
Patrick, the floor is yours, young man.
Sure. Yeah, I could take over. Yeah, so we are proposing new rates for the protective lighting. As you can see, we're changing the installation fee, proposing that it goes to $50 for all offerings, and increasing the monthly fees depending on wattage and what we would consider to be size and output, and also style. We also are proposing to increase the wood pole rental rate to $10 per month. This would see payback in about 8 years of service. And we're also offering taller poles now compared to the slightly shorter poles that we have offered in our previous protective lighting service. And going forward, we're offering the highest efficiency LED products available, and we're going to discontinue the less efficient mercury vapor and sodium vapor lights. There are still a lot of those out there in service, and we're going to, once they fail, we think that we'll replace them with these more efficient LED lights and put them on this new proposed rate, while also grandfathering in the existing protective lighting rates until the end of life of those lights. And we also did a survey of what other municipal light plants are doing for their protective or private lighting services. And we think that these proposed rates fit within that, the best practices of the other utilities. And this was also informed by a cost of service analysis that I performed, and it considered all of the upfront labor costs and hardware and capital. So with these rates, we'll see payback in about 5 years of service. I think that's about it.
Hey, Patrick, so these protective lightings, these are not lights that are out in front of everybody's homes in town, so nobody's going to pay for those. I'm just trying to kind of talk for the general public here. If it's a private road, in other words, the town has not accepted that road, or that subdivision, are those protective lights, or are those just regular street lights again, and comes under our regular street light program? Nobody's paying for just a private road for poles, right?
I don't think they would, no, but
Yeah.
I think Ralph or Scotty could confirm that.
Okay. I just want to make sure that even though it's not an improved road, but if it has street lights, that's not going to be, they're not paying for those. So that's not a charge that somebody's going to incur. That. So this is a very limited audience that we're addressing. These are actually people who directly came in and said, hey, I want a pole in my backyard, my neighborhood, and want a light for protection, or I have an extra long driveway and I want a light there, and so they're paying for that. So again, a very minimal effect to the general populace that uses Selco, correct?
Right. Yeah. And often these are on our most popular customer for this service is businesses that want some parking lot lighting. So, yeah.
Okay, I didn't mean to jump ahead of everybody, but the other board members, if they have any questions, Mr. Trippy, any questions on these or comments on the proposed rate increase for protective lighting?
No.
Okay. Maria Lemieux?
No questions.
Okay. Mike Ruffolo?
No questions.
Okay, and I've already gotten my question in. So, with that said, we have a motion to. I guess again for the general public, I'll just read what the actual recommendation is. Okay, we recommend the commission vote to approve new protective lighting rates as follows: implement the new protective lighting rate as proposed below. Discontinue legacy protective lighting rates for new implementations. All new protective lighting fixtures will be installed under the new protective lighting rate. Grandfather existing protective lighting customers under the legacy protective lighting rate. Discontinue repair and maintenance of legacy mercury and sodium vapor lights. As fixtures and bulbs reach end of life, grandfathered customers on the legacy rate will be required to upgrade and replace their fixtures under the new protective lighting rate with LEDs. Decrease installation fees from $100 to $50. And also, but increase the wood pole rental from $2.40 a month to $10 per month, and decrease installation fee from, again, as listed again, as from $100 to $50. With that, do I have a motion to accept this, to move to approve the new rates?
I move that we accept it as stated.
Okay, do we have a second?
A second.
Okay, a roll call vote to accept the rates as presented. Tony Trippi,
Yes.
Maria Lemieux,
Yes.
Mike Ruffolo,
Yes.
and Bob Holland, yes. Okay, the rates are approved. That concludes agenda item 5. We'll move now to agenda item 6, which is review and consider approval of Selco operations standby policy. Mr. Roy?
Thank you very much. So this agenda item is something that I was looking for the board to consider adopting a new standby policy for folks that are not part of the bargaining unit. As you may recall from bargaining unit discussions, there has historically, since the beginning of time, if you will, been a standby rotation for the line and cable crews that respond extremely well to off-hours situations at a moment's notice. So what we're looking to do here is start to establish formal policies that dictate the standby of the administrative support staff that back those folks up and also perform other functions that aren't necessarily within the purview of a line worker on the front line or cable worker on the front line performing the restoration activities in many cases. And so this document helps solidify practices that we have had in place, but also starts to add a little more structure to our operation looking forward. And as we have, folks that retire or turn over, it's not as dependent on the individuals holding these roles. And so just to go through this really briefly, the standby responsibility clause is really the key to the whole soup here. In most, if not all, we're still going through and checking, but most, if not all, job descriptions have the general blanket clause that if we have an emergency, this isn't a bank or an investment firm, like we're a utility. So no matter what your role is, and we have an emergency event, you have to come back. And just as a point of realism, I have found with the changing workforce over the years, that has become more important. And as folks, for whatever reason, there's a variety of theories out there, but it emphasizes that when someone takes a position within a utility, it has different aspects that might, that differentiate our operation from others. And so our job descriptions have that clause, like every other utility for the most part, that has that blanket. But this is that next step. So in certain job descriptions, then there's the standby component. And so anyone can get called back if there's a superstorm Sandy or Hurricane Irene or something like that. But now there's just an everyday standby clause for the folks that aren't covered by some other bargaining agreement. And this sets, in these three, as you see in here, these three elements of our business have support staff that would perform a function in a standby capacity that's not necessarily, putting a pole back up or running a line, but all of the administrative work that is becoming increasingly critical to help these folks focus on their responsibilities as well. And so the key consideration for why this is also a policy is we outline these 7 umbrella criteria for what the standby responsibilities entail. And you see those there. And so one of the last paragraphs and what makes it an important policy is the way at least I've been viewing that responsibility and need for a policy, if you will, is anything that could result in this is the negative side, if you will, but disciplinary action for not adhering to the standards of the duties. Those are the items that need to be formally adopted as a policy by the respective boards for those utilities. And so that's where we have a formal standby. This would make that more structured, and it establishes this key set of criteria that you have to meet in order to serve in that standby capacity. And it also establishes a clear paragraph, if you will, about what happens if you don't meet those standards. And so we included electric cable IT in this. All three have expressed some level of need to incorporate a more robust standby policy. I mean, right now, since he's on the call, I will give him credit, but right now, Scotty is our line supervisor, is our point of contact 24/7, 365, should the line crew need support. And so as we're looking forward and looking at succession planning, these are the elements of the business we're looking to try and add a rotation to have more folks that bear that responsibility and can go on vacation without being interrupted. And so that's where each of these, you see IT is a little different, as our biggest customer, if you will, for IT is the town. So we just align their on-call hours to match that a little closer. And then the last thing, okay, so the other paragraph, the very last paragraph, so compensation for standby duties. So as this is an umbrella statement, compensation varies between industry. IT services have been different than cable, which has been different than electric. We currently have a standby rotation at the head end, which is different than the, right now, and then the electric, if you will, engineering side has no standby rotation. And so it's one of those things where we have to perform that analysis, and it establishes that blanket criteria to allow us to have a standby, a standby component to people's job descriptions. And then there's just that compensation component. We did do an analysis, perhaps to try and anticipate the question. Our thought is for electric and cable, there'd probably be cable, like I said, head end already has a rotation in place, but I would anticipate the operational, because it's just as another point, I guess I should make, it's not tied to salary. It's much like, I'd say it's closer to like the off hours call service, right? This is coverage for folks to be accessible off hours. Yes, this will be our employees, so those will be the folks receiving the funds, but it would be similar, like we have the off hours phone service that is an operational cost that gets captured in the operational buckets of the business. And so we anticipate probably around a $30,000 to $35,000 cost, if you will, to the operational buckets to implement a formal standby rotation to these business units.
Sorry, Chris, could you give that amount again? I didn't hear it.
Oh, sure. 35,000, right in that ballpark, depending on how the stipend, if you will, is structured. And so that's.
Can you describe that a little? First of all, does that include payroll taxes? I assume not. Is that you're talking about actual salary costs? And then how do you determine, is it like how is it measured? How is this pay figured out? What is this amount?
Absolutely. Sure. So this, in this proposal here, it has weekly standby. So quite often, the most utilities, to my knowledge, offer a weekly. Now, the day of the week it starts varies, but in this case, it's proposed as a Friday to Friday weekly stipend, and so you get paid a flat rate, which is slightly different than the bargaining unit, which is an hour. You get we also have a daily, but rather than an hourly for instance, for the week you get paid 10, 12, or in our case for the line crew, they're 20 hours of your hourly rate for standby duty. What I've seen for the administrative side is more of a flat stipend for Friday to Friday coverage. And so that would be entered in like any other stipend that an employee receives, whether it be longevity is, I guess, the one that just popped in my head, or others that you get paid on a regular basis in payroll.
So I guess I still don't get it though. If I'm I don't know, been there 10 years and I'm on standby, is that an extra $200 for the week because I'm quote on standby, or is it some and it's a flat fee?
Exactly. I'm sorry.
Sorry, and then how many weeks am I required to be on standby if I'm depends on the rotation or?
Exactly. It depends on how many people are in the rotation, which is another internal consideration where, you know, there are some folks that want 100 people in the rotation because they never want to be on call. There are others that want to be the only person in the rotation because, to your point, if you're the only one, then you don't have any other outside of work responsibilities, then you receive all of that compensation. But to your point, it's a week. It's just it gets added in as a on-call stipend. So you indicate to payroll who is on call. That's the person that gets assigned the payroll code, and they receive that flat fee that then gets processed through the payroll system.
Can anybody opt out of this and say, I don't want to be on the rotation, let the others do it if they want it?
Nope, that's another good question. And so the short answer is no, which made me think of the other way of looking at this where, particularly I found in the IT field, it's largely incorporated in the base salary. So you look at it two ways as well. And what I thought would also be helpful with is that comp study document, is you'll see some of these roles that are typically on call with respect to our peers. If you look, there's the other compensation category, and largely that's either overtime or standby that they would receive at our peer utilities. And so there's two schools of thought. There's one incorporated as part of a base salary and have no alternative compensation for standby duty, or just have a separate stipend, if you will, and like in this category. So there are two different themes, but predominantly by far the majority with the electric sector and cable sector is to have a separate identifier of a standby duty. This is where we're asking you to hold the phone, be within a certain radius. You can't go out with your friends. You can't have a drink. And so you're being compensated for basically being available at a moment's notice.
Right.
Is there anyone who's the class of employees that we're talking about? Is there anyone exempt? Like for instance, are you on? And I'm not picking on you on purpose,
No.
but could you ever be on standby and get extra pay to be on standby? Are there certain employees classifications that would never be get extra compensation for standby?
Great. Okay, great question. So these are typically the folks that support your frontline operations. So in this case, just I could, and please, I'm certainly open to any additions or feedback. More than open-minded. And so rather than list the individual job titles that could change, then have to go back and change the policy or leave it with the incorrect job title, I have tended to not incorporate it. But that's just been my personal preference. I'm happy to adjust that for clarity. But this is your engineers. So your electrical engineer, your senior engineer, and that's your line supervisor that we mentioned. So those are your managerial employees that support the front line. So right now we have a support where the line workers are called in, and they're, I'll just use electric if I may. they're called in, they're putting poles back up, they're running wires, but they're not running the computer. They're not interfacing with the other departments or communications with the public. They're not updating, calling customer service. They're not monitoring whether or not we need mutual aid, if you will. These are all the decisions that are typically punted to that next tier of support. Switching orders, if there is a major hit pole, you need the engineers to draft up switching orders to restore power. So all of these things right now are handled internally, more informally. We're very fortunate to have folks that are generally accessible, but I do see it as a potential risk that we want to head off, where we want to make sure someone is required by job duty to be available to do those tasks and avoid the situation where someone's not accessible.
What would happen, I guess, if the person has been paid for standby and then no one can reach them? I guess that's
Great question. So that's the key of trying to make this the policy, that this now enables us to go through the corrective discipline steps. So if it's, that is very situational, and I'll happily say it's in my, it's been a few years since I've been on call. I was on call for over a decade. It seldom happens because it's such a big deal. But in that case, it's, well, what happened? There are technology failures. We've had cell phones just not ring. We've had, we had pagers for a while. Pagers just were weird and they didn't work. But in that case, there's an escalation protocol that would escalate back to where we are. There's someone who will always answer the phone. I'm going to go out and say it. Hopefully it's not needed, but I'm just used to, I have this phone on me 24/7, 365. It doesn't, so it would escalate up to a point where you're going to get someone. And that's currently, we have that practice in place where whether it be customer service or the call service, they have additional phone numbers to call if they have trouble accessing the primary point of contact.
Okay. Any of the other board members have any questions? Mr. Trippy?
No, I don't.
Okay. Maria Lemieux?
I have a couple questions. Do we have, Chris, do you know how many people in each of these areas you would have rotating?
Great question. So ideally, my personal preference, and again, it's the standby wouldn't dictate head count, just to add that disclaimer. But ideally, I think it's usually 4, so you can split one individual per week each month. That's one of the things that I had noticed as that's for the GM highlights, but we did finally have an accepted offer for a double E. But again, in that rotation, identifying, if we don't have the head count in order to fulfill some of these roles, that's when I started looking at some of the duties and responsibilities. But so to more concisely answer your question, right now we'd have an electrical engineer once trained, so we're a year out perhaps, depending on the individual. We'd have a senior engineer. We have Scotty, who can be on call for 10 people, so we're lucky there. So that's 3. Some of the reason why I also try not to specifically cite jobs titles in this is that there have been circumstances in my past where right now we have a field engineer who's not an electrical engineer, but as we train folks and folks become able to perform the duties of the job, we can add in a field engineer if we need to. So that would be 4. So that's that mix. But right now we're really at 2 between Jonathan and Scotty. The double E I'm optimistic he'll be able to get up to speed a little bit quicker than a year. And then, so that's electric. Same thing. So for cable is a little bit different. We have the head. So cable is an interesting one where we have the field crews doing the poles and wires work, but we also have the head end. So the head end being essentially the substation, if you will, or the brains behind our entire cable business. And so this would also apply to them, which is also in place. We just don't have a formal, non-union policy supporting that on-call structure. And so right now, we're looking at how that's structured between outside plan on-call and head end on-call. But in that rotation, we'd probably have somewhere around, I don't know if that's a 3 and a 3 or just 6, if you will, but that's around the general head count for that. And then in IT is one we're working on. Again, currently we're working on the recruitment. We did make a couple offers this past week, towards the end of the week. But right now, I think I saw him on the call. Right now, Greg's our only internal IT person. We have Rosanna, who's great, but she's not your frontline IT employee. So as we look to staff IT support, having this in here doesn't necessarily mean we have to include standby in the job description. I just threw IT in there to enable us to leverage that as we gain more staffing there. So it'd be the same philosophy. What do we have for internal network server support, cybersecurity support? We have the Wally group that we brought in last year for that 24/7 coverage from tier 1 and support for our 24/7 town operations as well. But again, being a blanket policy, IT is in there, and then we can leverage that as the staffing levels.
And just one more question, just to confirm. So then if this person does get called on call, and has to come in and do something, or has to do whatever, wherever, just has to actually perform, then they're paid overtime for that, right?
If they are hourly. So
if-
many of these roles are salary.
Okay. So then that's just part of their salary then. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Mike Ruffolo? Any other
Yeah,
questions?
I don't know why I have so many questions about this policy. I guess I've not heard it. If you need more resources than who you paid standby for, what do you do?
I guess could you? I'm not quite sure what you.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think we all work, and I appreciate this. But then on the other, there's a flip side to it, which is, for me as a lawyer, do I work weekends? No. But if a client really needs me, guess what? I'm working weekends, and that's just how my life goes in my profession. And I think that's true for most professions, is that sometimes you just get that phone call and you have to work. And that's the true nature of most of our jobs. And I recognize that hourly, I don't know, maybe it's different than salary versus hourly, and from that perspective. So I'm kind of on a line here, which is trying to understand, well, what if you needed all hands on deck, but you only paid 3 people for standby, because you just need all hands on deck. You had that ice storm, right? And it's all hands on deck. Do you reimburse people because they jumped in even though they weren't on standby? Does it give a person an excuse, say, hey, I wasn't on standby, I don't have to work? Does it change the attitude of the employee and the belief that we're all here together, and we're all here when we have a problem, we're all here to have a problem. It's not an issue, well, I'm not on standby, sorry, that kind of thing.
Sure. Okay. Great. These are great questions. And yeah, no, I'm happy to, because some of this is based on my own experiences, if you will, with just that, a lot of those questions. And a lot of this has been driven by employee turnover, where if you have the same dedicated individual for 20, 30 years, then it never comes up. And then you get this turnover. And so to, I guess, answer your question and use some specifics. So I have had scenarios where we didn't have it in the job description where it said, if you work for the utility, no matter what you do, you have to come in for a major event. So that's category one. And because it wasn't in there, we tried to get customer service back, and they're, oh, well, did you see it's snowing out? Well, yes, it is snowing out. In fact, it's a blizzard. But we still need to answer the phone. So I don't know. And so that's where, it goes back to the HR professionals now to say, well, what can we do now? Like you would think most people understand they need to come in, but, it's back to the carrot and the stick. Is there a measure for us to require individuals to come back and do their duties when everyone else can stay home? And this is all before work from home as well. So that's thrown another little wrench in the mix, especially like customer service can instantly pick up phones now. But in that particular case, there was no underlying policy. So we can scowl and say, we're not happy with you, but there was no formal mechanism to require individuals to get in their car and brave the blizzard. And so then it's the next tier below that, which is the day-to-day coverage for all the calls that aren't some kind of major event that require that attendance, which are more frequent and I'd say intrusive enough to warrant some form of formal job duty, where something as simple as even carrying your phone with you to answer that in short notice, or I could speak for myself, or knowing, hey, I have to take 2 cars to swimming lessons or to the soccer game because I might be called back to work. Whereas, before, if you're not on call, do you have to take your kids out of the soccer game and then put them all in the car and drive to work? So these things start to clarify who has to be ready for that. And that's that day-to-day accessibility. And that's where I see this tier. This is that standby tier for day-to-day operations. And they're the ones that escalate to say, okay, maybe you're not on call. And also, hey, if someone can come in for something major, say, because let me use a non-storm event. Say there's a major equipment failure. That's unpredictable. Could be a sunny day like today. That's the other piece where someone might say, oh, sure, I'm available, but I'll be there in 2 hours. So standby also creates that insurance policy against response times, where generally, I totally agree with you. Everyone is dedicated and will come back when called. It's just, how long does that take? Are they waiting for whatever they're doing to finish, or are they at their cabin in the woods and they have to just get in the car and drive for a couple hours? So it starts to add that layer of insurance to say we have that second tier coverage. And today as well, people are looking for instant updates, instant communication. And so that's where it starts to add that back office support for our computer systems that can update as we implement an outage management system, where people can go in and say, how long will I be without power? Well, typically, we can't rely on the current on-call crews to do that because they're the ones actually fixing the pole. And so we need that second on-call support to launch the outage management system and create that resource for external communications. I think I hit some of your questions there.
Yeah, I think so.
Sorry, I don't mean to ramble, but
No, is this an identified? Obviously, is this what's driving this? Is it a competitive issue relative to what other utilities are doing, and from a splitting out salary type description, it's a means to get good employees and keep good employees? Or do you see this as a need within the organization because you're actually getting some pushback, or people aren't as available as you want them to be? Or is it maybe both of those?
Okay. I appreciate these questions. This is another great question. So I would look at, first and foremost, my concern would be with employee turnover. I do think we'd be okay in the short term, and would this have to be approved today versus 6 months from now? I'm not sure, but again, I see him. Hopefully he's not embarrassed, but someone like Scotty, is called all the time. And so I'm looking at this as a preventative measure to not having to rely on one individual on a continuing basis to be the point of contact for our field crews. Same thing on the cable. We have that. So that's the first one, to implement a rotation that I guess I'll use the term, but is more common than not. I would hesitate to call industry standard. I'd say I'm fairly comfortable using that, but it's very, very common to have that rotation because of the intrusion, if you will, of carrying that phone. And to your point, you hear a little noise and it's like, oh, did my phone ring? Oh, it wasn't. So there's a little bit of a mental component, if you will, to being on available all the time. So that's the first one. Then typically, and again, certainly we could choose a different path, but typically, because there's an additional compensation component to that, it does throw our numbers out of alignment with our peers. So if you're looking to take a job at Selco from your peer institution, and say, because right now, engineering, line supervisor, the other one, engineering in general, so field engineer, electrical engineer, senior engineer, at our peer institutions all have a standby component that we compare to. So you'd come to Selco and you wouldn't be in that standby, which is a compensation component that you get, in your take-home pay. You wouldn't be getting that. So that would have to be factored in. Is that made up for in our base salary? And currently it's not. And so we did that analysis where, with a standard standby, if you will, we would be competitive. And so there's that mixed in with it. I think it's the coverage component first and foremost, to make sure we have identified folks that are available and able to be held accountable for being available. And then the next one is to make sure we are in alignment with how the industry structure works, to make sure that when we do have turnover, we're not giving anyone culture shock to come seek employment here versus our peers. There's one other component, and I think I lost that. So that's really the two. It's the coverage component, and then being proactive about that, and then
employees who don't qualify for standby, do you think they're put out by the new policy?
I wouldn't say so. I think that I have personally found that to be even the folks in the standby rotation. There's a lot of folks that, depending on your personal circumstances, don't even want to be on call. They would give the money away and say, here, you be on call, take it. There are others, like I guess I'm repeating myself, that would say, yeah, I'll take all of it. We see it with the crews. You have folks that don't want any overtime. You have folks that want all the overtime. We see that a lot. But with respect to standby, the folks that don't get it, I think they're not in the operational roles. So they wouldn't, I don't foresee an issue explaining why they wouldn't get it, especially there are other roles that are supporting roles that can, like, take the closest one I could think of is customer service. They're not on standby, but they need to be called in to orchestrate the phones on larger events. The difference is the number of calls requiring additional customer service support aren't very frequent, and they are also hourly employees, so they know if they come in, they get compensated for it. So this is also a measure to incorporate compensation for salaried individuals in a standby rotation that otherwise don't receive any additional component for that support.
All right.
Hey, I noticed that Aaron LaCure, you had raised your hand. Did you have a specific question?
No, it was just in regards to the why or the what as it pertains to the on-call. from my experience or the head end's experience in general, the on-call, it's expected that anybody's available to deal with any kind of outage or major issue, like an all hands on deck team approach. And that has worked in the past for us. The idea of on-call, which the head end currently does, and we have, for many years, it's been a 4-person rotation. So once a week, every month, you're on call. And the idea there is that person, you're not just like sitting around waiting for a phone call. You're actively checking email and alerts from all the systems. So you have to be like attentive and ready. And that's like a major reason for the on-call, or in this case, standby stipend, is because you're actively reviewing everything. It's not like, oh, I'm available if you need me, call me to come in. You have to make the judgment calls. Like, okay, I see a system is down, because I'm either waiting for alerts or checking logs, that kind of thing. So you're paying a stipend for someone to be available near 24/7 for that week. So, obviously it can get demanding. Chris touched on it. Some people want to do it, some people don't. In the past, the head end has been really great about, you do your week because you understand that everybody else has to do a week. This new stipend is to protect, or standby is to protect even further, to support, as Chris had mentioned, like an operational perspective. Like, okay, you have the people who are actually fixing the problem, but now you have people who are available to communicate that out, whatever, notify customers, whatever we might need to do. They're there as like the communication support. So, that's just my personal experience. So I thought I'd mention it.
Thank you. Okay, with all the questions I think that have been asked, and I think I need a motion to approve the establishment of a policy for an operations standby policy. Do I have a motion to set in
Yes,
place?
I move that we establish that policy as stated.
Okay, and do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second. I would just like to add, Aaron, that was really very, very helpful, actually. I would love some feedback 6 months from now or a year from now to see, what did this cost? How did it go? How did employees feel about it? This is not one that I want to just it's a new policy and let it die completely. I would love to hear how it's going.
I concur.
What happens with with a block like this, it just becomes so entrenched in an institution and such an expectation that folks almost forget about it and just becomes part of the pay. And I just want to make sure that it's actually useful to the organization. And it sounds like it will be, based on what Aaron was saying, within his subgroup or group. I would love some more, just from our oversight standpoint. I'd love some more feedback over time on this one.
Okay, Chris, we'll leave that in your court, 6 months to a year, to come back once you get it in place and let us know how it's going, so we can further discuss it. With that said, we have a motion and a second to set in place an operation standby policy. We'll take a roll call vote to approve such recommendation. Tony Trippi.
Yes.
Okay, Maria Lemieux.
Yes.
Mike Ruffolo.
Yes.
And Bob Holland, yes. Okay, so with that, the operation standby policy is approved, and it's up to Mr. Roy and his crack HR staff to get that all in place. So that worked out very well. Okay, thank you. And then the next agenda item is number 7. The issue is review community bulletin board channel 26 transition to SMC. And so, Chris, you going to handle that, or is it Jackie?
I'll pass the baton if you allow me to, Jackie.
Sure. Jackie, hi.
So channel 26 is our local bulletin board channel, where basically community groups, town departments, and local businesses are able to post ads. There's no charge for like senior center messaging or town departments, but there is a fee for businesses that want to advertise, and it's pretty low cost. I think it's $30 a week or $110 a month or $100 a month if you pay for 6 months in advance. Part of the issue with this bulletin board channel is it takes a bit of time to manage it. And also the current technology that it's running on is reaching end of life. So the reliability of uptime on this channel has been progressively getting worse to taking more of our time. In fact, over the weekend, I believe there was an outage on it for a little bit. So in alignment with our split with SMC a few years ago, it made a lot of sense to hand this off to them. They have the resources to put towards it. It could be a new revenue stream. And it makes sure that all of the community generated content sits with SMC. So what we did was we spoke with them. Their board voted to take the channel on, and they've ordered, and I believe received equipment to stand up a new 26. So with the handoff for March 1st, the bulletin board channel will become their responsibility. It'll ride on new technology and be more reliable. So that's the gist.
So I no longer can email you on the weekends and say I got a blue screen of death for channel 26. I'm going to have to hunt down Mark Serra.
Well, so hopefully that won't happen anymore. And yes, that's the main reason why I'm doing this. No, I'm just joking.
No,
That won't
yeah,
happen anymore with the new tech, we don't think. And Mark Serra would be the one if there is an issue going
Oh,
forward.
great. No, that's good. I appreciate that. Thanks. And that was just for information. So I don't think there's any decisions we have to make on that. So thanks, Jackie, and the effort you're going to making that happen. So appreciate that.
Thank you.
With that said, I guess that leaves us the final agenda item, which appears to be the general manager's highlights, who's had most of the show and pretty much covered everything that's in there. But we'll give it back to you, Chris, so you can cover the other succinct points that you want to make.
All right, thank you very much. So just a couple of tidbits that I wanted to tie to other operating reports that we have here. I highlighted the first one, the transportation emissions from the State House News, mainly is emphasis again of the transportation sector's role in the state level climate targets. And so just to use that as a mechanism to, I guess, give credit to our integrated resources team again for standing up some new programs, not to jump around the packet, but our commercial fleet EV rebate program. Again, I think it's just a means to highlight the fact that our team is doing an excellent job of keeping our programs, I would even not even say, up to speed, but, a leader in achieving a lot of these goals that people are still asking, or how are we going to achieve them? Well, if they need an answer, you can come to Selco. We'll tell you what needs to be done. And so, so that's just one to highlight. There's the linkage between our efforts and larger endeavors. And then a few others that just highlight some of the power supply components, natural gas infrastructure, talking about some of the fuel infrastructure in buildings. And another one, actually, because knowing we had the standby policy and we have the HR report, it is funny, but I threw in the Connecticut Utilities staffing under review because that had an interesting stat in there I wanted to call attention to, that just with annual turnover in adjustments, Eversource in this case has to hire to 40 to 50 line workers a year just to keep pace with the change. Never mind catch up or fall behind. Well, fall behind wouldn't be an option, but just to maintain the status quo. That's a lot of people in a very congested trade that is has a dearth of candidates. And so that's where I just wanted to highlight that, because these are things that I try and pay attention to with respect to making sure we are in alignment with our practices to make sure none of our folks are contributing to that 50 employee figure. So that just to, try and continue to emphasize, to not take my word for it, but try and cite sources that are credible out there to add context to some of our activities. Let's see, this another interesting tidbit. Electricity costs on the second page. Electricity costs skyrocket along with oil usage. That's what we're facing. We're trying to adapt to that. We'll have the GTA review next month. That's a March review, and so that's where these power supply costs and our forecasts come together. and we're not alone in seeing that. The other interesting piece is that I've seen an uptick in comments on is the fact that, January 21 oil was 0.2% and now it's 12. So that's another interesting component to the peaking issue. Which reminds me, it's not on here because it was hot off the press on Friday. I did receive a letter from a local organization. It's not from the First Congregational Church. It's individuals that are affiliated and meet as part of that group. But they sent a very nice letter, professional letter, asking us to abandon our participation in the peaking plant project. I only mention that because we'll scan that in and send a copy to the commission after this meeting, so you'll all receive a copy, and then we could formally discuss it at the next meeting. But just as a anecdotal tangent to this type of item here, you'll be receiving a scanned letter from that group. And then just the normal activities in the E&O report, similar to the theme, if you will. I guess it's tangential, similar is probably the accurate word. 24/7, 365 help desk support. We're still making progress on that. Again, continuing to have that accessibility for folks that leverage broadband for uses around the clock. I have a number of acquaintances that are in the computer science field that are just on the off shift because, the folks they interact with are on the other side of the world. It's fascinating. So, there's quite a few folks that leverage broadband needs in the middle of the night. And then the other one, let's see, fiber is progressing. That's in there. We included some numbers here for the fiber installs by nodes that generally gives you a rough idea of the neighborhood. And so we've had a push in our CSRs. They're doing a good job of outreach and trying to get folks to convert from the coax plant to the fiber plant. And so that's just a quick summary of the different areas and the status of our conversions, which again, I think is largely attributable to our CSRs taking that under their wing and doing proactive outreach to engage with the consumers directly and answer their questions and encourage them to make the swap to the better product. Edgemere Crossing, we hired a new cable maintenance technician, which we threw in there. Again, so I mentioned line workers a lot, but cable maintenance techs are, again, it's just a tough job market to recruit, not just anyone, but recruit talented individuals. And so we were fortunate to get someone there. And then the induction cooktop program, you can see that. That's another great component. I'm a big fan of that bag, by the way. And the EV, I already mentioned the EV rebate program. I think, again, we're just, we're doing a good job of keeping pace with the direction where we need to go. A couple other things I just wanted to highlight real quick is we engaged a consultant for cable and broadband regulatory compliance review, just to make sure, there's a lot of forms, and with the retirement of Mike Quidadamo, and just, I think out of good practice, we're making sure we engage these folks to make sure, we know all the forms we're supposed to be filing, rather than have someone say, hey, did you file this form? No, we've never filed this form. So they're doing that, and then they also provide the supplemental support to actually file the forms, either to get it done in short order, or basically provide that support to fill out the forms and train us on how to fill out the forms, and perhaps we take that over longer term. It's just one of those things, and make sure we're on the up and up with our compliance with respect to all the regulatory requirements. And then the last notation I wanted to highlight was the Weather Channel, Weather Nation transition, and certainly, like anything, happy to answer questions. So right now, our Weather Channel contract through NCTC is expiring at the end of this month, and similar to what I've seen with the, having now witnessed some of these channel negotiations, the Weather Channel folks seem to think that their channel is by far the best channel that's ever existed in the world. And I'm not sure there's a lot of justification behind that. And so we had these other couple of options to explore. Weather Nation does largely the core of everything Weather Channel does. They have a local component so you can get your local information, and they're at a much more reasonable, realistic price for basically the same service. So with that, not to mention the fact, if we will, we put in there, the bundle requirement that Weather Channel is trying to establish, which is if you want Weather Channel, you have to get all this other stuff that we're not necessarily interested in. So, which again comes with a significant, I'll use that word, significant amount of cost. So with Weather Nation, it seemed like a fairly easy decision to pursue that option for the same services. But I think that covers that. Certainly happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Do any of the board members have any further questions or comments to make? Tony Trippi,
No.
Maria Lemieux,
No.
Mike Ruffolo.
No.
Okay, and the only other comment that I have to make is I'd like to thank Mark, Sarah, and SMC for their video support for this, and look forward to seeing how Channel 26 becomes populated as we go ahead here. So with that said, entertain a motion to adjourn with our next meeting scheduled for Tuesday, the 22nd of March, 2022 at 7:30 a.m. That will be an open meeting at the town hall. So with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do you have a second?
A second.
Okay, roll call vote to adjourn. Tony Trippi,
Yes.
Maria Lemieux,
Yes.
Mike Ruffolo,
Yes.
Bob Holland, yes, and we will adjourn at 8:52. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.